everyone, and welcome to Lavender and Sage. I'm Abigail, and I use she, her pronouns. Today, I'm going to be talking about the most controversial and popular topic yet. I am a huge Marvel fan, so I'm super excited to talk about the bi-representation in the Loki TV show and how queer representation is treated in the MCU/Marvel Cinematic Universe. Or should I say Marvel Cinematic Multiverse? I don't really know if that's exactly a thing that people call it yet, but I don't know, that's not really what I'm talking about. Also, quick disclaimer, there will be spoilers, so if that bothers you, I'd highly recommend clicking off and maybe watching this video once you finish whatever shows and movies you want to see. So, if you're not familiar with the character of Loki, he is a villain/anti-hero who is in multiple MCU films, and recently, last summer, got his own show on Disney+. He is the god of mischief and known to be kind of a trickster character. In the first Avengers movie, he tries to take over New York City, and there's a pretty big internet debate over whether or not he was actually evil, or whether he was possessed by the Tesseract, or whether he was forced and tortured to do Thanos' bidding, but I'm really not going to go too deep into that. Over the course of multiple movies, he becomes more of an anti-hero type character. He's kind of the definition of chaotic neutral, so he's really out for himself and does actions that benefit him, whether they're morally good or morally bad, but towards the end of his life, he gets a little bit better. Sorry for that spoiler. I already said a spoiler mention, but anyways, yeah, if you've seen the show, he finds a way to come back because of a whole bunch of time-traveling stuff that happens in Avengers Endgame, so he's back. There's one version of Loki that can be seen in the MCU that's alive, but the Loki that's in most of the MCU movies up until Endgame is dead, so it's a little complicated, but it's the same character. So he is ambitious, intelligent, unpredictable, and narcissistic. He is one of the most complicated and three-dimensional characters in the MCU, and he's definitely a fan favorite. He's definitely one of my favorite characters too, so that's really cool. Although the character is not exactly identical to the Loki of Norse mythology, there are some parallels. So in Norse mythology, Loki is also the god of mischief, and he is gender fluid and also has a fluid sexuality. Like many ancient deities, he makes some questionable choices and sometimes has offspring with animals, kind of like Zeus, that whole entire kind of thing. So Loki definitely does not do this in the MCU, or at least he hasn't yet. But he is gender fluid and bisexual in the comics. So in the trailer for the show, there's a quick shot of a criminal profile that the TVA's, Time Variance Authority, made for Loki. So on the profile, it describes his sex as fluid, and after that trailer, many fans were super excited about the possibility of Loki being gender fluid in the show, like how he is in the comics. However, the show did not expand on this or even mention it at all, which disappointed quite a few fans because they thought they were going to get some cool gender fluid representation. In fact, the show made most of his variants, alternate versions of himself, male, except for one character who I'll talk about in a little bit, and all of the male variants were shocked that there is a female version of them, so that's not exactly a gender fluid kind of representation at all, considering the fact that all of them presented as male and were shocked that there was a female version of themselves, even when the character is gender fluid and in the comics presents as both male and female. And Loki's also, just as a character in the MCU, he's also a shapeshifter, so that really shouldn't surprise them too much. So that was kind of controversial and a little bit strange. In short, many people were disappointed with the gender fluid representation in the show, or lack thereof, and called Marvel out on it. So now I've got to move on to the big topic, which is the bisexual representation in the show. In one of the episodes, Loki and Sylvie's his female variant, have a deep conversation about various topics, and one of the topics is about love. So Sylvie asks Loki if he has any possible princesses waiting for him back at home, or even possibly a prince, and to that Loki replies, "A bit of both." That's it. That's the representation. That's all that is said. So I read many articles and watched many videos about people's opinions on this representation. So some people are pretty upset that the representation is so small, while others are ecstatic that bi-representation was even included in the first place. I'm going to try to explain both perspectives and then explain why I'm kind of in the middle. So obviously, if you didn't know this already, Marvel is a multi-billion-dollar company, and the movies and shows are watched by audiences all around the world, including audiences in homophobic countries, or I should say countries with homophobic laws. Since the main objective of a company is to make money, they have not included that much LGBT representation in their movies because movies with that kind of representation sometimes are banned by countries with homophobic laws. Also, I know Marvel, a lot of the producers and executives say that the main goal of Marvel is to make people happy and live up to Stan Lee's legacy and inspire people and things like that. But I think we do need to look at it from a more logical perspective. And I think it is kind of obvious that, it's a big company, so of course it's going to care about money and where they get their money and how they sell their shows and things like that. But I'm going to talk about why it should be better than it is right now. So there are many Marvel first queer characters. They've thrown around that term a lot. Same thing with Disney in general. I think I'm going to talk about that in a later episode. I feel like that could be really interesting, but anyways, that's besides the point. So directors and executives often hype up the LGBT representation, and that representation most of the time disappoints people or just doesn't even exist in the first place. For example, some directors confirmed that Valkyrie, who was first introduced to the MCU in the 2017 film Thor Ragnarok, my personal favorite MCU movie of all time, and they stated that she is bisexual. So people got really excited when they made this announcement, but it wasn't even touched on or mentioned in the movie, which is pretty strange. Really hope they'll touch on it in Thor: Love and Thunder. I would totally, if they do have representation, I'd totally love to touch on that on an episode in a few months after it comes out in July. The first mention of anything LGBT related in Marvel movies, not the shows, just the movies, because at this point the shows weren't nearly as popular as they are now. Sorry to the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans. I know there's some representation there. I just haven't got around to watching that show yet. It's just not nearly as popular as the Disney Plus shows. Anyways, that first snippet of representation or LGBT being mentioned was in Avengers Endgame, which was released in 2019, and it was one of the highest grossing movies of all time, if not the highest grossing. I didn't do that research. I apologize. So, towards the beginning of the movie, Steve Rogers, Captain America, leads a kind of group therapy session, and one character mentions that he went on a date with a man. Actually, fun fact, this was a cameo from the director. And that was talked about for approximately 30 seconds and then never mentioned again. So, slow start. So, Loki was released kind of shortly after that. It was released summer of 2021, I believe. Well, it's not that shortly. It's a few years apart. And it was considered a major step up, but I think we need to recognize that the bar was set pretty low. So, I think that's something that needs to be recognized a bit. So, like I said, Loki is a really beloved and popular character, and that's why a lot of people were happy to see themselves represented in one of the most popular characters. He's my favorite character, so I thought it was pretty cool that it was confirmed that he was bi. However, there were some people who thought the representation was kind of problematic for various reasons. So now they've kind of shown that Loki has more relationship options because he's bi, and instead of kind of expanding on that and looking at other opportunities of things they could do with their relationship, he falls in love with the alternate version of himself, the female version, Sylvie. I have opinions on this that I could talk about all day. The directors confirmed that they weren't genetically related, but I think it's still really weird because they are alternate versions of the same person. Also, a lot of fans argue that it's not incest or it's not weird, and I think a good rule of thumb is if someone says something of the along the lines of it's not technically incest, it's probably incest. And so some people also argue that they're gods and that Loki is a narcissistic character, so it makes sense for him to fall in love with himself. Some people say the whole entire show is about self-love and this is just an expression of it, kind of like a metaphor. But once again, it really just does not sit right with me. And I don't know, a character that's supposed to be super duper cool, bi representation, yay, and is now kind of dating an alternate version of himself in a way. I just wasn't really a fan of that relationship. And I think since that they decided that they wanted Loki to have some sort of relationship in a show, and they wanted to make him bi, I think it would have been cool if they made him be in a relationship with like a dude or like a gender fluid character or something like that. Because like that option is open now, but they chose to make the really, really strange decision of kind of doing a self-cessed kind of thing. I was not a big fan. So a lot of Marvel directors and executives have expressed how proud they are of this representation, and some people do think that it's a really huge step for bi representation in media. But other people believe that it's not exceptionally amazing. Some people even think it's bad. Loki's coming out, I've kind of heard it described as a blink and you miss it kind of moment because it's just one sentence. I have a lot of friends who also watch the show, and I had a few of them tell me that they didn't even notice it in the slightest. Kate Herron, who is the show's director, she is also bisexual, stated that Loki's bisexuality won't be explored any further in the series, including in season 2 that is coming out next year. So this was just one little mention, and that's it. So one quote that expresses people's disappointment with Marvel LGBT representation is from an article from Them, which is a online LGBT news website. I'll link it below. And the author of the article says, quote, "After so many years without an explicitly LGBTQ plus Marvel character in any major film release, it's great that queer fans can officially see themselves in the beloved anti-hero on a streaming show. But the MCU has an exhausting habit of relying on queer-coded moments and the promise of LGBTQ plus representation to attract queer audiences, while also refusing to commit to anything more substantial," end quote. So I agree with this quote a lot. I think a lot of the promises and the descriptions of the representation and how proud they are of it are pretty empty, and I definitely think while a whole bunch of like directors and stuff do care about their queer fans, I definitely think there was possibly a little bit of a money incentive so that when people hear the shock factor, like, oh my god, Loki's bisexual, people will want to watch the show. I don't think it was entirely a publicity stunt. I don't think representation in general, queer representation, is a publicity stunt, but I think money may have played a factor, if I'm being honest. Because like I said, Marvel's not like a really kind, amazing human person. It's a big corporation. It's not technically their job to represent us. They don't have to, they don't want to. Money is their top priority, but if they do care about the opinions and feelings of their queer fans, I do think they would do a little bit better instead of just doing the bare minimum and expecting everyone to love it. I mean, people do love it. People love this show. People love this character. People love the representation, but I'll keep on talking about it in a minute, but I definitely think Marvel has the potential to do better. So after Loki was released in June and July of 2021, the next big Marvel movie, like the ones that they've been talking about for a really long time that will like change the future of the MCU, was Eternals, and that was released in November of 2021. The movie was decent. I preferred Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. I think that movie was criminally underrated, but Eternals was a little bit of a bigger production because it kind of like set the groundwork for what the next phase is going to be like and what the next big Avengers team up movie is going to be like, things like that. And in my opinion, this movie had much better representation than Loki, like significantly better. So one of the main characters named Festus is married to a man, and they have a son together and live together. So in one scene, the main characters gather at his house, and Festus and his husband openly talk about their relationship. It's treated exactly like a normal straight marriage, which I think is fantastic. They even they kiss before Festus leaves on a journey with all of the other characters, so they weren't afraid to shy away from that. So I think this representation was so much better than Loki and past representation in the MCU, because I think it has a really good balance of being like low-key and not really low-key. Anyways, and it's not really in your face, but and it's also like at the same time it's still visibly and noticeably queer. It's not like in that one Star Wars movie where there's like a couple kissing in the background of a big crowd scene and they edited it out so that they could make money for it in China. Like, this is something they couldn't really cut out of the film. So I thought that was great, and it was really just a large improvement from the past movies and shows. And I hope that Marvel continues this kind of representation. I thought it was great. Mainly, this debate around the Loki TV show is really just a debate between people with different opinions on what representation should be like. There's a side of people who are completely fine with small amounts of representation that are sometimes not even noticeable. And there's also a side of people who think that it should be better, people who think that it should be discussed and talked about and not be able to be like edited out or anything. So I definitely think there should be a balance between talking about like LGBT stuff a lot and a balance of it like being low-key and not really in your face. I think there is a little sweet spot in the middle, especially because Marvel shows in particular aren't about being queer. They're about good versus evil, action, comics, that kind of thing. They're not like Heartstopper where the main topic is about being LGBT and accepting yourself. But I mean, there are some Marvel movies with like underlying messages of things like that, but they're never really just about personal, like human conflicts. And yeah, so like even though Loki's about self-love, it's not about self-love with internalized homophobia, because he has no internalized homophobia. He does not care. According to some people, the planet of Asgard does not care about being queer at all. So that's just really not a topic of the show. That's not what it's focusing on. So I mean, it kind of makes sense that it's not discussed for a whole entire episode, or it's a conflict going in within himself. But I definitely think it could have been better. Yeah, I'm definitely happy that they included that little snippet of Loki being bi. And it's kind of great. He is one of my like all-time favorite characters, and he's a lot of people's all-time favorite characters because he's great. But I just think they could have executed it better. And I'm not going to try to blame the directors or anyone in particular because, you know, Marvel does have strict standards and it is reviewed a lot and they make a whole bunch of strategic choices. So I'm not going to blame any one person in particular, but I definitely think as a company, Marvel could do better than Loki. And I'm glad that they did better in Eternals. And also, I did see Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness. The character America Chavez has two moms, and she is lesbian. And in the movie, it's mentioned that she has two moms, and they show the moms, and she talks about them. She doesn't talk about her own personal identity, but she does have a pride pen, and I think written on her arm, there's "Love is love." And I mean, I thought that was pretty good. I'm glad that they treated having two moms as normal, and even though they didn't explicitly talk about her being lesbian like she is in the comics, this movie really wasn't about her. So, I mean, if there's ever a future show about her or something like that, I think that'd be cool to talk about. But I think for what it was, that representation in that movie was pretty good, and also was something that they couldn't edit out as well. So that's good. You know, people all over the world are going to see it. It's not going to be able to be ignored. I'm interested in seeing how they explore that character, and I'm excited about seeing how they explore Valkyrie's sexuality. I love Valkyrie, and I love the Thor movies. I'm so excited for Thor: Love and Thunder, and I'm really excited to review that eventually. But I mean, although I'm happy about this, like I said, it could be better, and there are a lot of people who agree with me with that. And also, it's not necessarily a big step for the bi community because we've had representation in the past in big TV shows like Doctor Who. One of the people that contributed the most to this debate was Russell T Davies, who actually was a executive producer of Doctor Who, and he talked about Loki in a interview, and he called the representation in Loki pathetic and a ridiculous, craven, feeble gesture. And although I don't agree with it like entirely, I definitely think he has some valid points. Because in his shows, he's also directed other queer shows in the past as well. He's not afraid to talk about it. He's not afraid to risk losing money and things like that. So while I wouldn't exactly call the representation pathetic because it was like fine, it was like the bare minimum, I do agree with him in the sense that it could have been better, and Marvel shouldn't be afraid of talking about topics like this. Don't get me wrong, the representation isn't horrible, but it's not exactly the incredibly exciting and groundbreaking thing that a lot of Marvel executives and fans are making it out to be. So I really hope we see improvement in the future. And I'm excited to see what the MCU does next, because there's a whole bunch of new shows and movies coming out. So I think Marvel should have lots of opportunities to improve. Okay, that's it for now. But if any of you guys have any comments or questions about any of these shows, or of course recommendations, feel free to comment below, DM me on Instagram, or answer one of the polls or anything like that. I will link all of these things below. I will link the articles that I read. I'll link the Instagram as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I'm super excited to see you next time.